Chiricahua Mountains foothills, Arizona Territory, autumn of 1872. While neighboring Apache families quickly covered their wickiup frames with standard brush and hides before winter, Hunter Running Bear was still gathering materials in his fifth week of preparation, layering prairie grass bundles 1 foot thick around his dome-shaped shelter. His fellow hunters called it wasteful effort. The tribal elders shook their heads. Why use 10 times the grass when thin brush coverings had kept families warm for generations? Then the brutal winter of 1873 arrived. Temperatures plunged to 20 below zero with sustained winds, creating the harshest conditions in living memory that would test every shelter in the territory. Standard wickiups and settler log cabins burned through massive amounts of firewood just to maintain barely livable temperatures inside. Families huddled around fires that consumed cord after cord of precious wood. But Running Bear's grass-insulated wickiup needed only 25% of the firewood that log cabins required while maintaining a steady 65 degrees inside. What did this Apache hunter understand about natural insulation that both his own people and the white settlers had completely missed? The morning mist clung to the oak groves of the Chiricahua Mountains as Running Bear knelt beside his carefully sorted piles of prairie grass, each bundle bound with strips of yucca fiber and weighing exactly 3 pounds. At 34, he had spent 16 winters in these foothills, watching families struggle through the bitter months when temperatures could drop to 20 below zero and winds howled down from the peaks at 15 miles per hour. He had also spent 2 seasons with a Ute hunter on the northern plateau, where he witnessed a grass mat shelter require only a handful of logs to maintain warmth through a week-long storm. Soft Step approached with their sons, Little Wolf and Red Cedar, carrying armloads of freshly cut big blue stem grass. The 14-year-old Little Wolf had been counting each bundle as his father instructed, reaching a total of 233 bundles representing nearly 700 pounds of dried grass. Red Cedar, 2 years younger, helped his mother examine each bundle for proper density and moisture content. Running Bear had taught them that grass cut too early retained moisture that would freeze and expand, while grass cut too late would be brittle and provide poor insulation. The frame itself had taken 3 days to complete. 24 oak poles, each 10 feet long and carefully selected for straightness, formed the skeleton of what would become their winter shelter. Running Bear had positioned these poles in a perfect circle with a 7-foot internal diameter, spacing them 1 foot apart and driving each pole 12 inches deep into the packed earth. At the apex, 8 feet above ground level, he bound all poles together with braided yucca leaf cord, creating a dome structure that would shed wind and snow while minimizing the surface area exposed to heat loss. Horizontal lashing sticks, spaced at 1 foot intervals from ground to peak, provided the framework for attaching the grass bundles. Running Bear had learned this technique not from Apache tradition, but from careful observation of beaver lodges, where layered sticks and mud created chambers that remained above freezing even when surrounding water turned to ice. The same principle would apply here. Multiple layers of insulating material with trapped air spaces would slow the transfer of heat from inside to outside. As Running Bear began the methodical process of layering grass bundles, starting from the bottom and working upward in overlapping rows, his neighbor Red Feather appeared with several other hunters. At 38, Red Feather had built successful shelters for over a decade, using the standard Apache method of brush and hide coverings, typically 4 to 6 inches thick. He watched Running Bear tie each grass bundle individually to the horizontal framework, shaking his head in disapproval. "You tie more knots than you shoot deer, Running Bear," Red Feather called out, drawing laughter from the other men. "We have only so many grass bundles in the valley. Why waste them on thickness when 1 layer has served our fathers?" Running Bear continued his work without responding. carefully ensuring each bundle overlapped its neighbors by 4 inches to eliminate gaps where cold air might penetrate. His method required precise placement. Each 4-foot-long bundle had to be positioned horizontally, with the cut ends facing downward to allow moisture drainage. The overlapping pattern resembled the scales of a fish or the shingles on a settler's roof, directing water away from the interior while maintaining continuous insulation coverage. Old Hawk, the 68-year-old elder whose opinion carried weight among the families, arrived as Running Bear reached the halfway point on his grass installation. The elder had supervised shelter construction for decades, teaching younger couples the proven methods passed down through generations. He watched the meticulous layering process with growing concern. "Running Bear, you tie up your grass and waste your days," Old Hawk declared, his voice carrying the authority of age and experience. "The standard thatch and hide shell has kept our people safe through winters far worse than any we expect this year. Why burden yourself with such labor when proven methods work?" The criticism reflected deeper concerns about resource allocation and tribal survival strategies. Grass that Running Bear used for his thick insulation could provide bedding for multiple families or tinder for emergency fires. Time spent on elaborate construction reduced hunting opportunities during the critical pre-winter period when families needed to build their stores of dried meat. Old Hawk's objections represented the collective wisdom of a people who had survived in this harsh environment for countless generations. Running Bear paused in his work, looking across the valley where other families were completing their own shelters using the traditional method. Brush bundles and animal hides covered dome frames in layers averaging 6 inches thick, creating homes that had indeed proven adequate in normal winters. These structures could be completed in 2 days with minimal materials, leaving more time for hunting and food preservation activities. "We build for the storm we expect, not the storm we hope won't come," Running Bear replied quietly, resuming his careful placement of grass bundles. He had observed something others had not: the increasing severity of winter storms over the past 5 years, the way chinked log cabins leaked cold air through gaps that opened as wood dried and contracted, and the correlation between shelter wall thickness and fuel consumption that he had witnessed during his time with the Ute people. As the sun reached its zenith, Running Bear completed the lower half of his grass installation, achieving a consistent 12-inch thickness around the entire circumference of the dome. The structure already looked dramatically different from neighboring shelters, resembling a giant haystack more than a traditional Apache dwelling. Children from other families gathered to stare at the unusual construction, their parents following behind to examine this departure from established practice. The work continued through the afternoon as Running Bear methodically covered the upper portion of the dome, leaving only an 18-inch square opening at the apex for smoke ventilation. Each grass bundle had to be secured with individual ties to prevent wind from loosening the insulation layer. By evening, the exterior walls measured 12 inches thick throughout, containing an estimated 13 times more insulating material than standard brush and hide coverings used by neighboring families. The storm front that swept into the Chiricahua Mountains on January 14, 1874, brought weather conditions unlike anything the region had experienced in living memory. Within 24 hours, temperatures plummeted from 20 degrees above zero to 20 below, while sustained winds reached 25 miles per hour with gusts approaching 40. Snow began falling at dawn and continued without pause, accumulating to 18 inches by the third day and showing no signs of stopping. Running Bear's extended family had grown to include his father-in-law Gray Elk, whose own smaller shelter had proven inadequate for the increasingly harsh conditions. The 62-year-old elder now shared the dome with Running Bear, Softstep, and their 2 sons, creating a household of 5 adults and children in the 7-foot diameter space. Despite the additional occupants, the interior temperature remained remarkably stable, hovering between 65 and 70 degrees during daylight hours and dropping no lower than 60 degrees during the coldest pre-dawn period. The fuel consumption patterns that emerged during the first week of the storm revealed the dramatic efficiency of Running Bear's design. Where neighboring Apache families burned between 70 and 90 pounds of seasoned oak per day to maintain barely livable temperatures in their brush-covered wickiups, Running Bear's household consumed only 35 to 40 pounds daily. Each log in his carefully stacked fuel pile weighed approximately 20 pounds, meaning his family burned roughly 2 logs per day compared to the 4 to 5 logs required by families in standard shelters. Thomas Miller's log cabin, considered the most substantial structure in the immediate area, demonstrated the limitations of conventional settler construction under extreme conditions. The horizontal pine logs, each 8 inches in diameter and chinked with mud and stone, had seemed adequate during normal winter weather. However, as temperatures remained below zero for consecutive days, the wood contracted and gaps appeared along the chinking lines. Cold air infiltrated through these openings, creating drafts that made it impossible to maintain consistent interior temperatures despite burning 6 to 8 logs per hour during the worst conditions. By January 20th, Miller's cabin required between 150 and 200 pounds of firewood daily, with interior temperatures struggling to reach 60 degrees during daylight hours and dropping into the upper 40s after midnight when the fire burned low. His children began showing signs of cold stress, with pale fingertips and complaints of constantly feeling chilled despite wearing multiple layers of wool clothing. The physics behind these dramatically different fuel requirements became evident through direct observation of heat loss patterns. Running Bear's dome shape presented only 154 square feet of exterior surface area, compared to the approximately 500 square feet of wall and roof surface in Miller's cabin. More critically, the 12-inch grass layer surrounding the dome created an insulation barrier that slowed heat transfer at a rate 13 times more effective than the minimal insulation value provided by solid log walls. Red Feather's family experienced the failure of conventional Apache shelter design as the storm entered its second week. His 8-inch thick brush and hide covering, which had proven adequate during normal winters, could not prevent interior temperatures from dropping to 53 degrees on January 22nd. His wife and children suffered mild frostbite on their toes despite maintaining a fire that consumed 87 pounds of wood daily. The smoke hole, sized for normal weather conditions, allowed excessive heat loss when frigid winds created strong updrafts that pulled warm air from the interior. Old Hawk's traditional wickiup faced even greater challenges as the accumulated snow load increased the stress on the brush covering. On January 24th, a section of his hide covering collapsed inward under the weight of 2 feet of snow, creating a gap that allowed cold air to pour directly into the living space. His family evacuated that night, seeking shelter with neighbors whose structures remained intact. The elders' fuel consumption had reached 90 pounds per day before the collapse, yet interior temperatures had dropped to 52 degrees with dangerous drafts affecting the sleeping areas. The storm's persistence tested every shelter design in ways that normal winter conditions never could. Sustained cold prevented the typical warming periods that allowed families to reduce fuel consumption and repair minor damage to their coverings. The constant wind created convection currents that accelerated heat loss from any structure with gaps or thin walls. Snow accumulation added weight that stressed frame joints and covering materials beyond their normal load-bearing capacity. Running Bear's shelter demonstrated superior performance across all these challenges. The overlapping grass bundles shed snow effectively, preventing dangerous accumulation on the dome surface. The thick insulation layer eliminated the temperature differentials that caused condensation and ice formation on interior surfaces. Most importantly, the minimal surface area and superior insulation value meant that a small fire could maintain comfortable living conditions without exhausting the family's firewood reserves. During the storm's third week, desperate families began arriving at Running Bear's shelter, seeking temporary refuge. Swift Eagle and his wife spent 2 nights in the dome after their own Wickiups covering failed, experiencing firsthand the stable temperatures and minimal fuel requirements. Dancing Wind brought his children for 3 consecutive nights when his shelter's interior dropped below 50 degrees, observing how 37 pounds of wood per day maintained warmth for 7 people. The contrast became undeniable as February approached. While neighboring families faced the prospect of exhausting their winter fuel supplies with 5 weeks of cold weather remaining, Running Bear's carefully calculated wood pile retained nearly 2/3 of its original volume. His stored food supplies remained stable in the consistent interior environment, avoiding the freeze-thaw cycles that spoiled provisions in structures with fluctuating temperatures. The cascading failures that marked the 4th week of the unprecedented storm revealed the critical vulnerabilities inherent in conventional shelter designs. Thomas Miller's cabin experienced its most severe crisis on January 28th, when the fireplace began backing up smoke due to downdrafts created by the extreme wind conditions. The smoke filled the interior space, forcing his family to open the ductor partially for ventilation, which immediately dropped the interior temperature to 45 degrees. Miller's wife and 3 children huddled in the farthest corner from both the smoking fireplace and the open door, wrapped in every available blanket while he struggled to clear the chimney obstruction. The structural integrity of log construction proved inadequate under the prolonged thermal stress. As the horizontal pine logs contracted in the sub-zero temperatures, gaps widened between the timbers despite the mud and stone chinking. Quarter-inch cracks appeared along multiple joints, creating pathways for wind-driven snow to enter the living space. Water from melted snow accumulated on the floor, where it froze into treacherous ice patches that made movement dangerous, particularly for Miller's elderly mother who had joined the household for winter protection. Red Feather's family faced evacuation when their Wickiups hide covering began separating from the frame on February 1st. The continuous freeze-thaw cycles caused by temperature fluctuations had made the leather brittle, and the mounting wind pressure finally tore a 3-foot section loose from its bindings. Cold air poured through the opening, creating an interior temperature that plummeted to 48 degrees within 2 hours. His wife gathered their children and essential supplies, abandoning the shelter they had occupied for 3 months. The inadequate smoke ventilation in standard Wickiups created additional hazards as families attempted to compensate for heat loss by building larger fires. White Moon's family suffered carbon monoxide poisoning symptoms when they blocked their smoke hole partially with hides to reduce heat escape, causing dangerous gas accumulation in the confined space. His youngest daughter lost consciousness briefly before they recognized the problem and restored proper ventilation, though this meant accepting the rapid heat loss that made their shelter barely habitable. Food preservation failures compounded the survival challenges facing families whose shelters could not maintain stable temperatures. In Thomas Miller's cabin, the fluctuating conditions caused repeated freeze-thaw cycles that spoiled 12% of his winter provisions. Barrels of preserved vegetables froze solid when the interior temperature dropped below 32 degrees, then thawed and began rotting when daytime fires raised temperatures above 40. The loss of critical nutrition stores threatened the family's ability to survive the remaining winter months. Old Hawk's evacuated family took refuge with Swift Eagle, creating overcrowded conditions that strained both fuel supplies and food resources. 8 people now occupied a shelter designed for 4, requiring additional firewood to maintain minimal warmth while consuming provisions at double the planned rate. The elder's arthritis worsened significantly in the cold conditions, limiting his ability to contribute to firewood, gathering, and other essential survival tasks. Dancing Wind's Wickiup experienced a catastrophic collapse on February 3rd when the accumulated snow load exceeded the structural capacity of his frame poles. Two of the main support timbers snapped under the weight, causing a section of the dome to cave inward and destroy the carefully arranged grass and hide covering. His family spent that night in the open, huddled around a fire that consumed an entire day's worth of fuel in 6 hours while providing inadequate protection from the wind and blowing snow. The community's firewood reserves, carefully calculated for a normal winter, approached critical depletion by the beginning of February. Families had consumed nearly double their planned fuel allocations, leaving insufficient supplies for the final month of the winter weather. The extreme conditions made gathering additional firewood nearly impossible, as standing dead trees suitable for burning lay buried under snowdrifts that reached 4 feet in protected areas and were scoured bare by wind in exposed locations. Running Bear's household continued operating with remarkable efficiency throughout these community-wide crises. While neighboring families burned through their emergency fuel reserves, his dome required only its consistent 37 pounds of wood per day. The stable interior environment meant that his stored supplies of dried venison and acorn meal remained perfectly preserved, showing no signs of the spoilage that plagued other families. His wife Softstep reported that their sleeping furs stayed dry and warm, eliminating the mold and dampness problems that affected bedding in other shelters. The superior moisture management of the grass-insulated dome became particularly evident during a freezing rain event on February 4th. Where other shelters experienced water infiltration through damaged coverings and inadequate sealing, Running Bear's overlapping grass bundles directed moisture away from the interior. The natural properties of prairie grass allowed water vapor from cooking and breathing to migrate gradually through the wall system without creating condensation on interior surfaces, maintaining dry living conditions that prevented the respiratory illnesses affecting other families. By February 5th, 3 families had lost their primary shelters entirely and were dependent on the generosity of neighbors whose own situations remained precarious. The community faced the prospect of multiple deaths from exposure if the extreme weather continued much longer. Food shortages loomed as damaged provisions forced families to consume their remaining stores at accelerated rates. The social structure that normally supported mutual aid during difficult times strained under the unprecedented scope of the crisis. Running Bear's methodical preparation and unconventional design choices now appeared prophetic rather than wasteful. His dome not only sheltered his own extended family comfortably, but had provided emergency refuge for numerous neighbors throughout the storm. The thick grass insulation that had drawn criticism during construction now represented the difference between survival and catastrophe for multiple families who had witnessed firsthand its superior performance under the most extreme conditions their region had ever experienced. The final phase of the 23-day storm tested the endurance limits of every surviving shelter in the region, as temperatures remained consistently below zero through the first week of February. Running Bear's dome had become the de facto community center, with displaced families rotating through its warm interior while their own damaged structures remained uninhabitable. On February 6th, the shelter housed 9 people simultaneously: Running Bear's family of 5, plus Thomas Miller's wife and 2 children, and Swift Eagle's elderly mother, who had developed a persistent cough in the cold conditions of her son's overcrowded Wickiup. The mathematical precision of Running Bear's fuel calculations proved accurate even under this increased occupancy. Despite nearly doubling the number of people generating body heat, cooking needs, and door openings, The daily wood consumption increased only marginally to 42 pounds per day. The dome's superior insulation meant that additional human body heat actually improved the interior environment, raising the average temperature to 68 degrees during peak occupancy periods. This phenomenon demonstrated the efficiency of the dome's heat retention system. Once warmed, the thick grass walls held thermal energy for extended periods. Thomas Miller's acknowledgement of his shelter's inadequacy came on February 7th when he formally requested instruction in Running Bear's construction methods. Standing in the dome's comfortable interior while his own cabin remained barely habitable at 52 degrees, Miller examined the grass bundle installation with the practiced eye of a carpenter. He noted how the overlapping pattern eliminated thermal bridges, the points where heat could transfer directly from interior to exterior through solid materials. His own log construction created continuous thermal bridges every 8 inches where horizontal timbers contacted each other. The technical superiority of the dome design became quantifiable through direct comparison of fuel efficiency rates. Miller's cabin, when functioning optimally, required 152 pounds of wood daily to maintain 58 degrees average interior temperature. Running Bear's dome maintained 66 degrees average temperature using 37 pounds of wood daily, representing a fuel efficiency improvement of over 75%. This dramatic difference stemmed from the combination of reduced surface area, superior insulation value, and elimination of air infiltration through the seamless grass covering. Old Hawk's transformation from skeptic to advocate culminated in his visit on February 8th when he spent an entire day observing the dome's operation during peak storm conditions. The elder measured the interior temperature at multiple points using a simple mercury thermometer Miller had brought from his cabin, recording consistent readings between 65 and 67 degrees throughout the living space. He also noted the absence of cold drafts that plagued conventional wickiups, where temperature variations of 10 to 15 degrees between floor and ceiling levels were common. The superior air quality inside Running Bear's shelter impressed visitors who had grown accustomed to the smoky, humid conditions in their own homes. The dome's smoke hole, precisely sized at 18 inches square, created optimal draft conditions that drew combustion gases upward while minimizing heat loss. The grass walls allowed gradual moisture migration that prevented the condensation buildup plaguing other shelters, where water droplets froze on interior surfaces and created ice patches that melted during the day, causing perpetual dampness. Food storage advantages became increasingly apparent as the storm's duration exceeded all previous records. Running Bear's stable interior temperature prevented the freeze-thaw cycles that had spoiled provisions in other shelters. His carefully arranged stores of dried venison, acorn meal, and preserved vegetables remained in perfect condition after more than 3 weeks of extreme weather. In contrast, families whose shelters experienced temperature fluctuations had lost an average of 18% of their winter food supplies to spoilage and freezing damage. The social dynamics within the community shifted dramatically as Running Bear's dome proved its worth under the most severe testing conditions imaginable. Red Feather, whose own Wickiup had failed catastrophically, spent February 9th learning the grass bundle preparation techniques that he had previously dismissed as wasteful. He observed how Running Bear cut each bundle to exactly 4 feet in length, bound them at 3-inch intervals with yucca fiber, and tested their density by compressing them to ensure optimal insulation properties. Swift Eagle's family experienced the dome's advantages firsthand during a 3-day stay beginning February 10th. His wife, initially skeptical of the unconventional design, marveled at how her children slept soundly through the night, without the shivering that had plagued them in their own shelter. She noted that cooking activities could proceed normally in the stable environment, whereas temperature fluctuations in their Wickiup had made food preparation difficult and dangerous when ice formed on cooking surfaces. The engineering principles underlying the dome's success became evident to Thomas Miller as he examined the pole framework and grass installation during his extended stay. The 24 support poles, spaced exactly 1 foot apart around the circumference, distributed structural loads evenly while creating a framework that naturally shed wind forces. The dome shape eliminated the flat surfaces that created pressure differentials in conventional structures, reducing both structural stress and heat loss through forced convection. Dancing Wind's family, rendered completely homeless by their shelter collapse, found refuge in the dome from February 11th through 14th. During this period, the structure housed 12 people without compromising its thermal efficiency or structural integrity. The experience convinced Dancing Wind that he would adopt Running Bear's methods when rebuilding, having witnessed how the grass-insulated walls maintained comfortable conditions even with maximum occupancy. By February 14th, as the storm finally began to weaken, Running Bear's woodpile retained approximately 2/3 of its original volume, representing sufficient fuel for several more weeks of normal winter weather. In stark contrast, neighboring families had exhausted their primary fuel supplies and were burning furniture, tools, and emergency reserves to maintain minimal heat. The community faced potential tragedy if the extreme conditions had continued much longer, making Running Bear's successful preparation the critical factor that prevented multiple deaths from exposure and starvation. The spring of 1874 witnessed a transformation in shelter construction practices throughout the Chiricahua Mountains as families prepared for the following winter with newfound respect for insulation principles. Swift Eagle became the first to adopt Running Bear's methods, beginning construction in late April with a dome frame identical in dimensions and pole spacing. He gathered 800 pounds of big blue stem grass over 6 weeks, cutting bundles during the optimal drying period when moisture content remained low but fiber strength stayed high. His wife Whitefeather supervised the bundle preparation, ensuring each 3-pound bundle achieved the proper density through compression testing techniques she learned during their stay in Running Bear's shelter. Thomas Miller's reconstruction project began in May with a hybrid approach that combined log cabin structure with thick grass insulation principles. Rather than building another conventional cabin, he constructed walls using horizontal logs spaced 4 inches apart, then filled the gaps with compressed grass bundles arranged in the same overlapping pattern Running Bear had demonstrated. This modification reduced his wall surface area thermal conductivity while maintaining the familiar rectangular floor plan his family preferred. Miller calculated that his new design would require 60 to 70 pounds of fuel daily compared to the 152 pounds his original cabin had consumed. White Moon's family initiated the most ambitious adaptation of the grass-insulated dome concept, scaling the structure to accommodate his extended family of 8 people. His dome measured 9 feet in internal diameter with a 10-foot peak height, requiring 32 support poles and nearly 1,000 pounds of grass bundles. The increased size presented engineering challenges that Running Bear helped resolve through careful adjustment of pole spacing and grass bundle overlap ratios. The larger dome maintained the same insulation principles while providing adequate space for multiple families during emergency situations. Dancing Wind's reconstruction incorporated innovations based on his observation of moisture management in Running Bear's shelter during the February crisis. He installed a double-layer grass system with an air gap between inner and outer walls, creating additional insulation value while improving ventilation. The inner layer consisted of 6-inch thick grass bundles, followed by a 4-inch airspace, then an outer layer of 8-inch thick bundles. This configuration achieved an estimated insulation value of 18, representing a 40% improvement over Running Bear's original design. The technical knowledge transfer occurred through systematic instruction sessions where Running Bear demonstrated specific construction techniques to groups of builders. He showed how grass bundle density could be tested by compressing a sample bundle to half its original thickness and measuring the recovery time. Properly prepared bundles recovered to 90% of original volume within 30 seconds, indicating optimal fiber arrangement for insulation performance. Bundles that failed this test contained either excessive moisture or insufficient binding, both conditions that reduce thermal efficiency. Archaeological evidence from the period, documented in 20th century excavations, supports the widespread adoption of thick-walled dome structures throughout the region during the 1870s. Foundation post patterns discovered at multiple sites show the characteristic circular arrangements with 1-foot spacing that define the grass-insulated Wickiup design. Carbon dating of organic materials found at these sites confirms construction during the mid-1870s, corresponding to the period following the severe winter of 1873 to 74. Old Hawk's acknowledgement of his error became a teaching moment for younger tribal members who had witnessed the elders' initial resistance to innovation. During the autumn gathering of 1874, he formally credited Running Bear's methods with preventing multiple deaths during the unprecedented storm. His endorsement carried particular weight because of his decades of leadership in shelter construction, and his willingness to admit his mistake encouraged other traditionalists to consider adopting the proven improvements. The fuel efficiency measurements recorded during the winter of 1874 to 75 validated the widespread adoption of thick grass insulation. Families using the improved designs averaged 43 pounds of wood consumption daily, while maintaining interior temperatures between 64 and 68 degrees. This represented fuel savings of approximately 70% compared to conventional log cabins and 58% compared to traditional thin-walled Wickiups. The reduced fuel requirements allowed families to allocate more time to hunting and food preservation activities during the critical autumn preparation period. Red Feather's successful implementation of the grass-insulated dome design restored his standing within the community after the failure of his original shelter. His family's survival through the winter of 1874 to 75 without incident demonstrated that the construction techniques could be mastered by any skilled builder willing to invest the additional labor required. His dome consumed 39 pounds of fuel daily and maintained an average interior temperature of 66 degrees throughout the coldest months. The long-term legacy of Running Bear's innovation extended beyond immediate survival benefits to influence broader understanding of thermal engineering principles among indigenous builders. His empirical observations about heat loss rates, insulation values, and moisture management anticipated scientific concepts that would not be formally described by engineers until decades later. The knowledge he developed through systematic experimentation and careful measurement established construction standards that improved shelter efficiency throughout the region. By 1876, 7 families in the immediate area had adopted variations of the grass-insulated dome design, creating a community of builders who continued refining the techniques through shared experience. Their collective fuel savings exceeded 2,000 pounds of wood annually, representing a significant conservation of forest resources while improving living conditions during the harsh winter months. The innovation that had been dismissed as wasteful labor 2 years earlier now stood as proven technology that enhanced survival capabilities for multiple generations of families who built upon Running Bear's foundational insights.